Right. Okay. Thanks for making it, everyone. If you have not heard of Jesse yet or met him, he's the creator and curator of the Palmyra Atoll Digital Archive. If you haven't visited his site, you're missing out, and I highly recommend you pay a visit to his site. I'll put it in the chat. And yeah, I guess Jesse, if you want to share a little bit more about how you became interested in Palmyra, yeah, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, thanks, mate. You guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, so thanks for the kind words. Yeah, I think we're almost at 10 years since I first published the archive. Next year will be 10 years. And I think I stumbled onto Palmyra the way a lot of people do, or at least a lot of people I've talked to did, which is not on purpose. And then you kind of couldn't stop looking into it once you got dug in. So yeah, it's been a real adventure to just kind of fall in love with the atoll and meet the people who both folks from your team and your group that are actively doing things now, and then a lot of people that I don't know, it's that whole like quantum state where nobody had anyone to tell their stories to until someone was asking for their stories, and it's amazing the people that just kind of randomly find the archive and then say, hey, I have this story from my grandfather who served there, or from my uncle who was doing research or whatever, and we've been able to just kind of collect all that in one place. And yeah, it's I was talking to a kid the other day. It's funny because it goes in bursts, right? So there'll be like 6 months to a year where it's just radio silence. Nobody's really visiting, nothing new, and then all of a sudden there's 4 or 5 people who go, hey, I found this thing, or was wondering about this, and it's it's really cool to get to share that with other people and keep learning more about it. So yeah, and thanks especially to this group, because the work you do is amazing, and it keeps opening new doors for research into the history, and people the more they see Palmyra wherever they see it, the more they want to reach out and share their own stories or ask really interesting questions that I don't know the answer to, but then I get to ask much smarter people than me to see if they know. So yeah, it's been a really cool project. So yeah, I'll go ahead and get started here. Share my screen and see if it lets me. There you go. You guys see that? Show?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So, and I always preface these by saying, please interrupt me if you have questions. Whatever momentum I'm building on an idea, I don't mind at all stopping completely to diverge into some rabbit trail. This is the chance I get to talk about this stuff that I really love. It's not like I'm walking around in my daily life and there's a whole bunch of people that are interested or working on Palmyra. So I'm really excited to talk to you all as well as present this information. So again, please feel free to jump in. But yeah, I just wanted to give I'm calling it brief history of copra farming on Palmyra. So I say brief because there are dozens of accounts of pseudo attempts or visits just to grab some coconuts and go sell them somewhere. But I really wanted to share some more of the well-documented stories are the ones that I really like. And again, just have a chance at the end for any questions you guys have or any feedback you have, other information as we go through this. So again, please feel free to share. But the real theme of this, as with anything to do with industry in Palmyra, is it's how to not get rich. I say farming copra, but doing anything. To date, the only person who has made money on Palmyra was the guy that kind of less than legally obtained ownership rights to it in the early 1900s. Otherwise, everybody's tried and nobody's been able to pull it off. So that's more or less the recurring theme. But yeah, Matt, like you said, and like I just went over, I've been managing the archive for almost 10 years now. I live just outside of Indianapolis, Indiana, with my family. And when I'm not doing this, I'm full-time IT guy. So as we go through this, things might break, and that's because I'm an IT guy, and that's what happens when you do technology. Your own stuff breaks all the time. So apologies in advance. But yeah, what was fun going through this is there was really like a formula that came out of what almost all of these Copra farm attempts, and really any attempt at industry on Palmyra looks like, whether it's building a resort or Beach Lamar or fishing or anything. They all seem to fall into this kind of this same step-by-step formula of failure. So the first thing they always do is somebody forms a small company so that they can get investment and look legitimate. Then they purchase or lease the land rights for an extended period. I mean, the average is 50 to 100 years, and no one ever lasts that long, right? But the idea is that they go to the owners or whoever owns it at the time, and they say, hey, we want to lease for 30, 60, 70 years on the land. Then they hire some, I mean, this is where it gets interesting for me, is these very eccentric American Europeans. I mean, Scotland has produced some of the best failed managers at Palmyra for some reason. I don't know why, but there's some kind of theme there. And then they hire a labor force of nearby islanders who are probably the only people in any of this that actually know what they're doing. And they're happy to just make a couple paydays and then go back to Gilbert or Christmas or wherever home is. And then most interesting for me is that for reasons rarely related to farming, they always fail, and usually at or before the 1 year mark. And then as a nice follow-up, everybody gets sued. Either you sue the person that screwed you over, or you sue the government, or the government sues you. But almost all of these things end in lawsuits because somebody lost money. So again, this is kind of the model for the ones I'm going to talk about, but really any of them, whether it's Copra or anything else. It's just what we see over and over again. So I wanted to talk about 3 farming attempts and what I call one shortcut. There have been, I think it's 6. I mean, I say documented because sometimes documentation means a sailor's journal mentioned that they stopped at Palmyra and there were people there farming Copra, right? So it's we can't always find like official documents, but it's about 6 that were specifically for Copra. Again, there's a lot of other industries people have tried. But I wanted to talk about these specifically because they were the most interesting. But the first one is, and I'm just going to, I've got these by basically the name of the manager or the person in charge or the central figure, because for me, that's really I love doing, is learning more about the people that were involved in this stuff. But so first one, it was 1873. So, Palmyra is discovered in 1802. It's depending on who you ask, it's acquired as part of the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1862 or 1856, depending on whoever has the right documentation. And everybody was trying to get guano. There were all of these acts from various governments that were like, hey, you can go just put a flag on this island and say that it's for guano production, whether there's guano there or not. And Palmyra fell into that category where there was guano, but it was terrible quality. Nobody wanted it. There wasn't enough to farm. And so it was still getting claimed, but then people kept going back trying to figure out how they could actually make money. So we don't know for sure who hired Clayton. We don't have enough documentation on that, but we know that he was there with a few folks. And Clayton Strawn is where we get Strawn Island. So that was named after him. And presumably that's partly because that's probably where he was setting up shop. So on the left is the, prior to the naval construction, and on the right is afterwards. It's, and just out of the picture here, so on the right, when you can see Cooper was still like the main, if you were going to go to Palmyra before the construction works, you'd usually go to Home Island and then you'd bounce over to Cooper. That was what people generally did. Cooper was pretty dense in terms of foliage, but there were a lot of these attempts involved going and trying to clear there. But for whatever reason, we think Strawn picked what he called Strawn Island, and the name stuck. And he's a pretty interesting guy. So I don't know how many people are familiar with Robert Louis Stevenson, but he wrote, he spent a lot of time in the Pacific, especially Hawaii. And so we have a lot of great stories from him about legends around Palmyra or other islands and other stories that involve Palmyra. But he gives this great description. He says Strahan because he would change the names of the people that he was talking about to, protect their identity or whatever. But we know he was talking about Strawn, and I'll just read this because I love how concise this is. He was born of Scottish parents in Philadelphia, ran away to sea in a whaler, which, by the way, was partly to avoid getting enlisted in the Civil War. He was not interested in being involved in that, so him and a couple buddies ran out of Philly, got on a whaling ship, and then headed for the Pacific. Deserted in Tahiti, where he was accused of a variety of things that we don't really need to talk about, but none of them were good. learned carpentering, coopering, seamanship, made copra in the Palmyras, worked on the Guano Islands, and led in all the ways the career of the South Sea adventurer. And this guy's great. He would write these letters home, back to Philadelphia, describing his adventures. And as far as we can tell, most of them were actually about other people, not the stuff he had done. So he was something, right? He was, he thought of himself as a legend for sure. But yeah, Doylestown, Pennsylvania, and he would just, yeah, there's articles from their local newspaper talking about his, voyage in the Pacifics and all these adventures he said that he had. But in terms of the actual farm, the only official record or account we have of it is from William Jones, who did a lot of really one of the first inventories of flora and fauna on Palmyra. He was part of the it was the North Pacific United States Exploring Expedition. It was kind of a follow-up to the U.S. Exploring Expedition in the mid-1800s. And so his material on that is really fascinating to read. But yeah, he just very simply describes it as one American and 8 Tahitians, and they were, the newspapers from this time never spell anything correctly, so I try to get it close, but who knows whether that's what they were actually calling things. But yeah, just listed it as not very productive at present, and this would have been 2 months into production. And all we really know for sure is that after a couple months, it was disbanded. Everybody went home. We don't know why necessarily, but from the accounts we get of Strawn, the guess is mismanagement. He was not great at managing folks in these kinds of efforts. So we assume mismanagement, and it just disbanded. What's interesting, I love this stuff, so silly. So William Jones was also from Philadelphia. These two guys were 4 years apart, and they were born and raised about an hour from each other. And they probably never met except this one time on Palmyra in the middle of the Pacific for no reason at all, which is just it's so bizarre to me to think that they, the weird connections people get in these things. It's hilarious. So, follow up to Clayton, he ended up getting diagnosed with leprosy. He probably caught it on one of his bouts through the Pacific prior to Palmyra. But he goes back to Honolulu. The rule then was, if you've got leprosy, you're going to Molokai. Someone will take you there to make sure you go. Like, nobody was messing around back then with this stuff. Molokai has a fairly infamous history, which there's a lot of good material on. And what's interesting is Strawn's name comes up a lot. He was put in charge of the colony for a bit as their superintendent. He ran, just day-to-day operations, helped build things, helped, he was supposed to be helping manage resources. Unfortunately, he ended up mismanaging them. Had some run-ins with Father Damien, who's a very well-known figure, Saint Damien now. And, thankfully for him, he repented, whatever you want to say, later in life, and made amends with Father Damien, and ended up kind of living out the rest of his life in Molokai, but before he died in the late 1800s. But again, just a really, not necessarily the brightest story, but very interesting stuff that Palmyra just ends up getting involved in. So yeah, and I'm going to try to break between this in case there's any questions that I missed. But anybody have any questions on that specifically before I go on, so I can take a quick drink break?
Well, just real quick. So when he arrived, he didn't bring any coconuts with him. They were already on Strawn.
Great question. I'm going to assume not, only because there's a few accounts prior to this. And the only mention of like a farming operation is when I think it was Zanias Bent, who was sent by the king in 1862. He left a few guys there to farm, and they actually mentioned taking saplings off of Palmyra. So the theme is more often that people will go to Palmyra, get some saplings, and take them somewhere else. It was just such a prolific producer that people were grabbing them and taking them somewhere else. It's a great question, though, because that does come up a lot in the stories, is, where not only are they bringing them there, but are they taking them to other parts of Palmyra? Which sections are they farming, all that stuff. So yeah, good question, though, for sure.
Thanks.
Okay. So we're going to skip ahead to 1904, and this is, what I call the shortcut. So It's a guy named Captain Weisbarth. He was well known at the time. I love reading about Honolulu harbor history because there's all of these just very eccentric people that, again, everybody knows, right? Everybody knows a lot of these weirdos who they just have these crazy ideas that they try to execute on. And so Weisbarth had heard that there were bird skins left over by Japanese bird hunters on Palmyra. And he was convinced that if he could get there and get them before anybody else, he'd be bringing back a fortune, which, to be fair, the rumor was it was $50,000 in bird skins adjusted. That's 1.8 million. So that's a pretty decent haul, right? That's not bad. And at the time, bird skins there's this again, very silly, recursive story where the Japanese had the softest laws on bird poaching. Everybody else was asking them to stop or telling them to stop. And, they just didn't. So they would get these bird skins, they would take them back, they would get processed in China, and then China would sell them back to Americans. So it was the American laws trying to prevent it, but it was the Chinese and the Japanese who ended up profiting from all of this. And to be fair, this is, early 1900s. It is kind of hard to enforce islands that are 1,000 miles apart with, your best Navy ship is a steamship. It's not like you can get there quickly to kick people off. So there were more concerted efforts eventually, but this was a fairly common thing where someone would report, tens of thousands of dollars worth of bird skins on some island or atoll somewhere, and people would go after it. So all that to say, Weisbarth takes his ship down to Palmyra. He hits a couple other places on the way, and he gets there, and sure enough, they're gone. He finds evidence that the Japanese bird hunters had been there, probably been staying there for quite a while. They would actually just set up shop, and then they would get resupplied from other passing vessels, whether they were Japanese or any other friendly nation, and keep working. So he didn't find that, but he did end up with a huge cargo full of coconuts. And this is the other side of it, right? So he didn't go there to farm anything, but he went there and loaded up. And again, 7,500 coconuts, 1,400 saplings, though. So, John, to your question, right? Again, this is a very common theme where people are like, they valued the Palmyra coconut because it had unique properties. It was larger. It was said to have a thicker husk. It was said to have all these things. And so it was, he was carting all this back, and then one large coconut crab, who I'm sure wasn't very happy because he just got thrown in the hold with all the other stuff. But he gets back, and unfortunately, all of the saplings, at least, were infected with larvae and mites. And so he couldn't sell them. And the harbor master was like, you can't even bring these. I don't even want you to bring them ashore. So there was forget where it was. There was a place in the harbor where they would basically dump stuff and burn it, right? If it couldn't come ashore, they would just safely take it over there, burn it all, and get rid of it. And there's a note from someone a couple years later who actually bought most of the coconuts. It's interesting because about 7,000 of them went and were still propagated, right? So they were brought on shore. They weren't used for Copra which was, I think, what Weisbarth was hoping he would get the benefit from. But they ended up getting propagated and then spread around the islands, at least according to this person. And then I think it was 3 dozen went to Los Angeles, and then a couple hundred went to other islands, like in the Pacific. So again, there's these themes of people going to Palmyra, taking the saplings, and then those ending up somewhere else. So yeah, what's really cool though that I really love is the coconut crab is still at the Bishop Museum along with a couple of his friends. So he had been Weisbarth had been contracted by the Bishop Museum because they didn't have any specimens of the coconut crabs, and not from those on Palmyra, which people kept reporting as being even larger than on other islands. So he brought some back. On one particularly, it had to get fumigated before it came on shore, so unfortunately did not survive coming ashore. But it ended up in the Bishop, and I got to meet it when I went out to Honolulu in 2019 on my way to Palmyra, which pardon my stupid grin and hat, but I was very excited. That was, so thanks to the connections at the Bishop Museum, they set this out so I could come in on a Saturday and take a look. But it's just hanging out in this jar with 3 other crabs from Palmyra at different times. Most of them are from an expedition in the 1920s. And I guess they just thought they should all be in same jar. But yeah, still there. So any questions on that? The Weisbarth? Okay. So next up is, I think this might be my favorite, definitely one of my favorite stories that I found researching Palmyra. So there's a colonel and his wife, William and Idelle Meng, and Idelle's just a really interesting person. She was from Austin, Texas. She was 25, and her aunt, who was wealthy, said, "Hey, let's go to Honolulu and just stay there for a couple months because that's what people could do." And while there, she met Colonel William Meng, who was he'd just gotten out of the British Army service. He had a series of awards and medals. He'd done some pretty amazing stuff in World War I, apparently, and had enough money to start up some kind of business industry. And a young guy named Edwin Benner pack up and ship off to Palmyra, and he has dreams of starting the first successful copra plantation on Palmyra. And he had again bought the rights from the owners, brand new owners. That was the Fuller Leo family, who until 2000 still owned most of Palmyra. But they had just bought it from Judge Cooper, and were looking to try and find some way to recoup their investment in the place. But yeah, they left Honolulu, got to Palmyra just fine, and they were supposed to be there for a couple months. So this was, I love this photo. So this is their house. This is on Home Island, and this is like this is like an amalgam of all the stuff that was left there from the last 20 years. So it's kind of hard to see in the photo, but the house is what's left of Judge Henry Cooper's from his first visit in 1910, when he bought Palmyra from all the other people and consolidated it. Those giant jars were left by the Japanese bird poachers. The metal roofing is actually from Christmas Island because it had been stolen and brought there to be used for some other project. So they just took everything they could find. They built this house, and they were supposed to be there for, I think, 2 to 3 months, just kind of setting up operations, and then they would bring in some laborers, and they would really start making some money. Unfortunately, every avenue they had for resupply ships, communication, backup plans. So, hey, if you don't hear from us, show up in 2 months just in case. Every single one of those things fell through, and they were there for like 7 months without anyone. So they were fine. They survived. And reading through Idelle's, she has some letters and journals, and she published some articles. It's really interesting to especially read about the early days, where they just had this like kind of simple life of they would in the morning, the two guys would wake up, they would walk 1.5 miles from Home Island to Cooper, because it was about 1 foot of water in the shallows at low tide. And then they would walk back at low tide again in the evening. And if they had enough haul, they would take a canoe and bring back the sacks of copra. But that was kind of their routine for a while until things started getting a little hairy, because their clothes were literally shredding and falling apart. They didn't have shoes. They were only eating what you can find on Palmyra, which is it was a lot, but it's still just fish and coconuts basically and heart of palm. So it's not like there's a whole lot of variety. But the other thing I love about this is how it puts into perspective the physical changes that have occurred. So if you look at this kind of, I try to come at this from some other angles, but so this is an aerial from 1935, right? So you can see a little better how there is this path that low tide, you can just walk across the lagoon, no problem, because they hadn't blasted through it yet, and it's a pretty clear path. Now, they also talk about how they had improvised billy clubs, because the black tips would bite your ankles if you didn't hit them as you walked through, because there were so many of them, they would go after anything. But again, to read these accounts of you knocked a shark on the nose and it learns not to touch anymore, and you keep going, and it's like, sure, that sounds like anybody's normal Tuesday, right? Walking to work. And what was interesting too is to think about the scope. So when they said Cooper Island, they mean that, right? So that area of trees right there, that was their Cooper Island, right? This is 1942, so it's before really any foliage has grown in on the new area of land that the Navy had built out. But you can see how much more land, and they just call it, they just call it Cooper Island, even though it's 2 to 3 times the size. Katie, those jars were for the rainwater. So the jars the Japanese had left, that was their, at least that's what the Mengs used for rainwater. There's a variety of, rain barrel catches. They used tarps. They used eventually bathtubs. I mean, anything that would hold water. But the Japanese had a really good system for staying on these islands for long periods of time, and they had, they would just leave a lot of this stuff behind, and then the folks from the U.S., from Hawaii especially, would benefit from that because they'd show up and just use what the Japanese left behind. But yeah, so yeah, I love the change in perspective here to just see, what their Cooper is versus what's there today. But so then again, they had about 7 months and they're really starting to get worried. And then thankfully a ship shows up accidentally and is able to take back some of their messages and get a hold of some folks in Honolulu to send out reinforcements. And interestingly, the U.S. had started it was their first aerial mapping, aerial photography program. And they were using Hawaii and some of the Pacific Islands as kind of like test cases to see how much it benefited, or if it was worth the money they were spending on these, newfangled airplanes that everybody was getting so excited about. And they were literally just sticking cameras, like, bolting cameras to the bottom of these planes and then flying over islands. And Palmyra was one of the candidates for it. So the ship that showed up in, I think it was about 10 months after they arrived, was the U.S. Eagle 40. And it was there to take aerial photographs and then take Idelle back to Honolulu because, again, you plan for 3 months and spending 10 is, it was a lot. And then I think a month later, her husband and Edwin, the other guy with him, came back too, and they kind of closed up shop. And it had just been, it'd been such an ordeal, and it had kind of like the time that they had lost in being unable to prove whether they could profit from any of the copra farming meant that it just got shuttered. But the Mengs moved to Santa Barbara and they became fruit farmers, and they did pretty well at that. And then Idelle, she wrote quite a few articles, all of which are in the archive. They're really, really beautifully written pieces. She wrote some letters to urging the U.S. Navy not to do all the dredging and construction works they did in the 40s because she thought it would ruin Palmyra. So there's some really cool material. But she ended up joining the Women's Air Corps in the 1940s during World War II. She was hoping that she'd get shipped off to Palmyra, or at least the Pacific. She didn't. She ended up in Iowa, which, no offense to Iowa, but it's not Palmyra. It's not Hawaii. So not exactly what she wanted. But no, she got to corporal status before she retired out, and her and her husband, just lived the rest of their life on their fruit farms in Santa Barbara. So yeah, again, I love that story. Just, it's like, sure, we've been married 4 months. Let's move to Palmyra and start a copra farm. Why not, right? And everybody does that. So, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, any questions?
Sorry, super quick question. This may be too long an answer. I can follow up with you, but I always heard that the Fuller Leos acquired Palmyra from Judge Cooper as part of a debt, or did they just outright buy it? He wanted to sell it and they bought it. Can you shed any quick light on that? If there's a longer story, I can catch up with you.
No, I hadn't heard that before. As far as I know, any of the documentation or records or anything I've seen, heard, is that they bought it outright. I think it was either 15 or 20,000 at the time, which again is the only reason that Cooper's in the black in terms of Palmyra, because I think he bought it. Well, he bought it. from various people for, I think the total ended up being about 10 grand. I think is what he spent after everything. So again, he was if you know anything about Judge Cooper, he was part of the annexation effort. He was held various offices in the U.S. Management of Hawaii, and he had unfettered access to things like deeds and land rights, and he used a lot of that influence and access to consolidate ownership of Palmyra into his hands. So yeah, but that's very interesting, kid. I hadn't have to look into it. I hadn't heard that, but as far as I know, they paid cash. So yeah, and and where they got the cash, nobody likes to talk about either. But walking into Honolulu with a lot of money from South Africa in the 1920s, there's only so many places you're going to get it from. So anyway, they seemed like their children are definitely lovely people and did a great job taking care of Palmyra. So end of the day, we'll say that, right? But oh yeah, and Meng Island is named after Meng Island is named after them. There was an Idelle Island as well, but that kind of got destroyed or absorbed in the construction projects. Sorry, kid, I diverted right away. Hopefully that answers.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So last but not least is in 1979, which is the last attempt at copra farming. So obviously there's a bit of a gap there, right? 1920 to 1979, there were some other things going on Palmyra during that time, and the idea of using it for anything that related to production was kind of the farthest thing from anybody's mind. It was recovering from the damage. It was being used for a variety of tests and other things. But yeah, in 1979, John Bryden, who had come to the Pacific in early 1970s with his brother from Scotland, he had been hired to he worked for Scotland Yard, and he was played almost professional rugby, whatever that looked like in the 70s in England, but ended up in the Pacific instead of any of that, and ran the most successful and largest copra farm that Christmas Island had ever seen. Did a tremendous job there, and made a lot of good contacts, made a little bit of money, and was looking for a way to leverage that, roll that into something that was his own instead of working for other people. And he started a copra farm on Palmyra, and within, I don't know, I didn't put any photos in here of what it looked like before, because it's hard to know which was before and after. The 70s was a weird time on Palmyra for a lot of reasons, but the photos from that time especially are a little misleading. All that to say, this is not what it looked like before he showed up. This is what it looked like afterwards. He got a crew of guys from, I think from the Gilbertese Islands, and they just went to town on it. They built a couple new buildings. They refurbished any of the buildings that were, sound enough to refurbish, cleared the runway. I mean, within 2 months, they had essentially a fully functioning farm. And some of those buildings were still there. I mean, in 2000, when the Nature Conservancy bought it, some of them didn't survive, but a lot of that stuff, he just really had a knack for organizing, fixing, and getting this stuff going. There were a couple trucks that had been left over from the war that he got working again, and they used as transport machinery around the atoll. So, I mean, he really knew his stuff. And again, only 2 months in, and he had kind of gotten everything working. And they just had these huge racks of copra where they would just dry it out. And because of the, obviously it's kind of rainy on Palmyra, so they had to do a lot of that indoors. But because of the heat, they didn't have to set up, gas fire ovens or wood burning ovens. Most of the time, they could just let it sit in these shacks, dry out, and then they could. Well, the idea was they would get it into bags, get it off the atoll, and get it sold. And they ran the numbers, and there's this. It was funny. A couple of years ago, a guy reached out to me who was actually John Bryden's partner in this, and he had worked for a variety of governments in the Pacific as like their buying agent. So he he would go to some of these Western countries or Western large corporations, and he would negotiate fair prices so these smaller island communities wouldn't get ripped off by these larger entities. And so he went in with John on this and ran all of these numbers on how they could make it profitable. And at the time, again, this is all 1979 money, but Copra was at 400 a ton, went up to 760 a ton because there was a big resurgence in the variety of products you could make with Copra. Yes, yeah. Oh, thanks, kid. Yeah, I should have mentioned that. Yeah, that one of those. Real quick. Sorry. So on the left there, that is the original yacht club. And we have a couple photos that it had been called that, or someone put a sign out. I'm pretty sure Bryden took all that down and painted it over, including any of the people used to sign their name and scrawl it on the wall. Some of that got knocked out because he was not a fan of yachties and didn't want them stopping by all the time to do whatever it was they did on Palmyra. So that took a break for a year, but afterwards it all came back. Their estimates here was it was pretty clear that if they could make 500 tons of Copra on Palmyra, which was their estimate, it's $250,000, which is 1.1 million today, and it was not because these guys were used to living in the Pacific. Bryden wasn't going back to some nice house in California or Honolulu. I mean, he was living there and planned to, so they could run it cheap from most perspectives and still make a lot of money. Unfortunately, it's Palmyra, so they're not actually going to be able to do that, even though this is as close as anybody came, because the same year, it turned out that the U.S. government was planning to store nuclear waste on Palmyra. There was a team that came out and scared the crap out of Bryden. I think maybe it was March, but they had just finished clearing the runway. And a Coast Guard ship plane lands, one of those C-130s, drops off a couple guys in military garb, and Dr. Jim Maragos, he was there. I think that was his first visit in '78. But and so we have a lot of photographs and material from his notes, from his side anyway. The military hasn't really released much of what they did, but he described it as they did a lot of they'd wake up in the morning, have something to eat, and then disappear into the jungle and do seismic tests, which meant they just went around setting off small explosions to test the coral and look at potential drilling sites, storage sites, anything like that. So it freaked Bryden out, but he didn't necessarily think it would disrupt anything. Military does weird stuff like that all the time. But 3 months after that, news breaks that the military is looking at a joint operation with Japan, because at the time, I think Japan had 20 or 30 nuclear power plants. The U.S. had 70. So they were, the Arizona Hills were only going to hold so much, and they were trying to find someplace that was not on U.S. soil to store this really terrible stuff. So there's a document in the archive that shows the blueprints, like the construction plans they have for it. And they're really terrible ideas. I mean, it is really, really absurd. Like, it's just basically fill in the eastern lagoon with concrete, and then, to however deep it goes, and then start dumping barrels in, and every so often put a layer of concrete over it. I mean, it's just stupid. And so thankfully, a lot of scientists and naturalists and political leaders came out and said, hey, there's this vortex of, and I'm going to get this completely wrong. I'm really talking to the wrong crowd to try and get this stuff wrong. There's this vortex of various currents and waterways, and just nature hits this and then goes in a lot of other directions. So if you wanted to distribute nuclear waste to the rest of the planet, this would be a really efficient spot to drop it and then let it leak out, because it will get everywhere it's not supposed to in record time. And thankfully, that convinced everyone not to do it, and they didn't. But it was kind of close. And unfortunately for John, it meant that the day that news came out, it hit front page newspapers, and literally that day, everybody left. They shut down operations. They got off the atoll, because the idea was, why spend any more money or time on something that at any moment could get just completely absorbed by a government project we'll have no say in. So that's as close as anybody came to making money, and they probably would have. But yeah, they just never really stood a chance. And after that, John left, and he's an interesting guy. As far as I know, he's still living on Christmas. He went back there and started a number of kind of odd industries. He did car rentals and delivery and shipping, all kinds of crazy stuff. So yeah, he's one of those guys that if you talk to yachties or the old sailors out of Honolulu Harbor, everybody's heard of him. Everybody knows John Bryden. He's kind of had his hands in everything for a while. And most importantly, though, he created the Palmyra burger, which I don't know if anybody's had, but he apparently hated the fish. He hated eating fish, and he hated the way that the workers cooked the fish. So he made this every day, which, thanks to the wonders of AI, we can generate a picture of, and it looks terrifying. I'm not saying it looked that bad in real life when he made it, but yeah, if anybody gives it a shot, I'd be very interested to know. There's a couple recipes, just random stuff that people made up when they lived on Palmyra, and this is probably the worst one I've seen. So yeah, maybe it's delicious. I don't know. Could be great, but yeah. So that's at a high level. Those are my favorites. Again, there are a few others, whether they're other industries or just other attempts. But man, it's amazing to see the kind of people that come out of this and and end up on Palmyra one way or the other. So just and again, just as a quick recap, because I love the fact that it had nothing to do with farming. So they failed because of mismanagement. Again, we assume, I can't say that for sure. Parasites and rough weather, which I don't know if I mentioned this, but Weisbarth almost lost his ship on the journey back. So he hit like 3 squalls in a row and then a series of harder storms trying to get back to Honolulu. His ship almost sank. It did sink 2 years later because I don't think he actually fixed it. But he lost a lot of money on that simply because he had to put so much money into his own ship to fix it. And then the Mengs, it was just miscommunication. Nobody knew what they were supposed to be doing or where they were supposed to be going, and they lost their farm because of it. And then nobody can predict geopolitics. So poor John Bryden and his I think the guy that I talked to, I think they said he had something like $100,000 of his own money sunk into it, and he did sue the U.S. government and got some of it back, but not enough to make it worth it, because again, these always end in lawsuits. So I always like to, I think I went longer than I meant to, but I always want to just throw it out and say, hey, if anybody has any questions about this or anything else, again, this is selfishly, this is my chance to get to talk about Palmyra. So I'm, whatever you guys, and whether they're questions or hey, I got something wrong and it's this and again, I love talking about this stuff. So please, yeah. All right. I'm terrible at managing hands up, so I guess
okay, Ryan. Let's
talk.
have Ryan go first. I think he was first.
Hi, Jesse. Nice to meet you. Thanks for the presentation. That was awesome, and I look forward to having more conversations with you. This is the first time we've met, and yeah, thank you so much for all this archival work that you've done. It's really amazing. Yeah, really appreciate it. My question is is oriented to the 1979 John Bryden effort, and have you talked to Bill Austin, Captain Bill Austin, who probably, I assume, would have been down there with John Bryden at times? And
is that the Machias? Is he the captain of the Machias?
Yeah, he's still around. We actually chartered his vessel, and he just did a resupply for us last year. And he's 90 years old, probably the most fit 90-year-old I've ever met in my entire life. But anyway, he has some really great archival stories, I feel, too. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to discuss or chat about his many efforts and trips to Palmyra. And I'll leave it there.
No. He's on my. I've got a short list of people that I, if I ever get the chance, I'd love to. He comes up in. Yeah, I think he made the most trips, especially in the '90s. I think he was one of the only guys who was making trips out there. But Roger, the manager from from 92 to 99, was good friends with him and has a lot of stories with him as well. So I've heard a lot of anecdotal stuff, right? A lot of stuff about, especially the stuff that the Machias was responsible for hauling in and out. But I have never had a chance to talk to him personally. No, but man, I'd love to. Yeah, I can't imagine the stuff that he's not written down anywhere, but knows about those efforts. Yeah, yeah.
All right, kid.
Okay, quick Firefly here. So I think John Bryden also had a surf camp he was running out of Fanning Island for quite a few years after he went back. Once they started up flights to Christmas, he would sail his boat down, bring these surfers back, and it was a flight every week. And then they would sail to Fanning, surf Fanning for a week, go back, drop off one group, pick up a new group. And he was doing that for a while too, which was pretty interesting. Like Jesse was saying, just had his fingers in like every possible pie. Side story. Talking about making money at Palmyra, I had an interaction with a captain of a boat called the Double D, a guy, Joe Detling, and unfortunately he passed away earlier this year. Super, again, eccentric guy, as you can only imagine, Jesse. But he told me many stories about shark finning Palmyra and Kingman Reef in 1995 and 1996, to the tune of 5,000 to 10,000 sharks per trip. I don't believe he's the type of guy that would lie to me. He had nothing to prove. So that also, I don't know any more than that, but I remember sitting around having those conversations with him, kind of like blowing my mind. But to know that our shark populations at Palmyra, are growing. They're continuing to grow still because of that effort of culling, essentially, what's that, 30 years ago. And then the final thing that people might find interesting, due to the 25th year anniversary of Palmyra, I've worked with for many, many years, and recently, as of last week, reached out to a gentleman by the name of Chuck Cook, who is somewhat the grandfather of TNC Palmyra, that he heard about the sale of Palmyra in 1999, or it may even be late 1998. And worked with the original Hawaii TNC director, Suzanne Case, who was a lawyer at the time, to go through the TNC purchase of Palmyra in the year 2000. So that we now have an interview with Chuck, which I asked him that I can record on June 2nd, so coming up here soon. And that is kind of the very beginning of the TNC chapter. And I did talk to Jesse the other day about at which point TNC becomes an archive. Right now, we're at 25 years. A lot of the stuff we're talking about goes back centuries, or at least a century or more. But at some point, TNC's involvement and then U.S. Fish and Wildlife's involvement is going to become archivable. And I think it starts right here with Chuck, and he's in good health, but he's retired, and it would be really cool to grab the story now. So just a few tidbits there to add. Thanks, Jesse, man. You tell such great stories.
Thanks, kid. Yeah, no, and it's amazing how many the names that just float around between reports and documents and newspaper articles, and then end up being these, treasure troves of stories. So yeah, no, it's anybody who has anything. It just takes these little crumbs to then lead to these much larger discoveries or much larger documentations. And U.S. Fish and Wildlife, especially, there's dozens of documents that have been shared or that are, publicly available that have all of these great stories in them, that they're just like one or two lines in these very detailed reports, but they really personalize the history. So it's really cool to see that stuff come up and make sure those people get their stories documented. That's awesome.
Jesse, the big concrete ovens, those are associated with the Copra plantation?
Oh, I always call them kids' pizza ovens. I don't know if anybody else calls them that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. So these would have been, they were just like, it was in those shacks, like up at the front by the, like the photo I had, that's just like the, by the, why can't I think of it? The yacht club. They were just like small outbuildings up there. It was basically just like, either they'd find old corrugated metal and use that as the shelves, or they'd use plywood, whatever they could find. But no, I think we're still looking for the answer. One of these presentations I gave, someone had mentioned, I think it was not missile, because it was World War II, like bomb drying. So there were these facilities that they would have on the Pacific Islands where they would take the bombs off the aircraft while they were being serviced. They would put them into these drying racks or ovens. I mean, we say oven, right? But it's not like they were heating this explosive material up a couple hundred degrees on purpose, right? They were just trying to keep it from rusting and eroding any environmental issues. So I think someone had mentioned that, but again, the issue there is that they're kind of far away from the runway, right? I mean, it's so the idea that you got to unload the bombs, roll them across, put them in these things, and then roll them back when you're done. I think that was close, but yeah, my guess is they were multiple things over multiple years, right? I mean, it's crazy to think how, like, we think of these things as single blocks, right? Like, okay, well, it was the naval occupation. It's like, yeah, but the FAA or the CAA was there in 1939, and they were already like using Palmyra to refuel. And then there was a slow progression. So this stuff got reused for various things. And so it could have been a morgue and a bomb storage and, literal pizza oven. It's like, who knows? But it'd be nice to find out for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. Any more questions from anyone for Jesse? Anything, Chris?
Just there's a couple of folks from Indiana here.
Oh. Yeah. What are the chances? We're in Indiana.
Yeah. It's Iceland.
I'm outside Muncie.
Okay. Yeah. I don't speak dog. I don't know where he's from, but that was nice of them to chime in. That's crazy. Yeah, how funny. Small world. Yeah, we're third landlocked. We're one of the most landlocked states in the United States, and yeah, makes it even more fun to talk about Palmyra. So yeah. Well, yeah, if there's no other questions, thanks everybody. I really appreciate the time. Again, this is a lot of fun for me to be able to talk about this stuff, and I'm always happy to share and answer questions. And the archive is it's always there. I try to add new stuff as it comes along. Like I said, it usually comes along in bursts, and there's a couple things we just I just got a response from the COVID was so weird for archive, not my archive, but like formal archives. The Vanderbilt collection at Drexel University, for some reason, just reopened and started responding to emails that I sent 5 years ago, and I just got a bunch of material from them because why not? So it's stuff like this just shows up sometimes, and yeah, I love to get as many eyes on it as possible just to get feedback and see what else might be there. So yeah, thanks everyone for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks,
Cool.
Jesse. Really appreciate it. That was great. I love seeing those old photos. It's so cool. And
yeah, I love that. I love having them do something besides sit in the archive, like actually get contextualized. Yeah, so yeah, it's great.
Great talk.
Yes.
I've learned a lot. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. Good to see y'all.
thanks,
Awesome,
Jesse.
Jesse.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
Jesse.
Bye, Jesse.
See ya.